2018 is the peak year in the world for the use of fossil fuel for power generation. Despite the fact that we're going to increase the amount of gas we're using to make electricity, the drop-off in the use of oil and the use of coal is so large that whilst gas is growing, the overall use of fossil power will be declining. And that's happening in some places, irrespective of what governments are doing.
I'm Adam Jones. This is the Future of Structures podcast. Tony Frencham is a Group Managing Director at Worley Parsons. He's responsible for execution and planning for power and new energy and leadership for the global energy transition. Fossil fuels have lifted many of the world out of poverty and has helped us in the developed world live a standard of life that most of our ancestors couldn't even imagine. But there are new pressures today, and we are in the midst of a major shift towards renewables in response to our new global challenges. So in this episode with Tony, we discuss a little about the history of energy and where it's going to go in the future, the role of public and private sectors in enabling the big transition, and how individuals can best adapt to the whole changing world. I really enjoyed speaking to Tony. He's a weapon of a person. He's very knowledgeable about this topic. So without any further ado, here is the interview with Tony Frencham.
Yeah, thanks, Adam. It's been an interesting journey. I started off as an industrial chemist. Did that at uni, went and worked in labs for 4 or 5 years, and then decided I wanted to go to the dark side and move into the commercial side and get the suit and go sell. And so did all that based out of Melbourne. Joined up eventually with an American chemical company, and then had 28 great years with them, including 17 years offshore. And during that time, I ended up doing a lot of, for want of a better word, change and business development, 6 joint ventures, but also a lot of helping the company then redirect themselves when a market was changing. And that's somewhat why I'm now at Worley Parsons, leading up our power sector, but in particular helping the company navigate the global energy transition that's underway.
Absolutely. So how, just from a higher level point of view, how is this transition, and where has it been in the past, and why is it moving at the moment?
Yeah, good question. And look, I'm going to take us back a century and a half. So this energy transition is underway at the moment. It's best to think of it as the third energy transition. So the first one, starting in the middle 1800s, was when the world started, the developed world in particular, started industrialising itself on the back of coal. And then around 1910, 1920, there was a pivot as the world started to expand its transportation on the back of oil, first of all, oil and gas ultimately. And then in the 1970s-ish, it's done another pivot as it starts to move towards a lower carbon future. And that was at a time when there was a lot of nuclear and hydro being installed, and a lot of electrification going on. But it's now picking up pace with the lower cost of renewables that have come out. And so we're on a track back to, in some ways, where we started, with a lot more renewables, a lot lower carbon. But in the meantime, we've industrialised the world and we've got a modern lifestyle, and we have to manage to get through this third transition without giving up all that.
So the typical consumer, I guess, who's might be listening, with prices in electricity, some will be concerned about sustainability. Everyone's concerned about reliability, and most people are concerned about cost. With the shift toward renewables, are all these things going in the right direction?
Well, you've got the 3 dimensions of the famous energy trilemma that you just mentioned then, so right on. And look, for all the stakeholders, they value each of those 3 items in different ways. I just got back from a trip where I was in Southern Africa, and there you've got a lot of people that are still not on track to have access to energy, access to electricity, and they're not, whereas most of the world's on track to be there by 2030, they're a long way behind. So talking there about sustainability and even reliability is not the issue. They need affordable power first and foremost. Look, whenever there's change, you get some predictable and sometimes unpredictable outcomes. There are plenty of countries in the world that are having electricity pricing spikes at the moment as they're going through this transition. It's hard to manage. It's particularly hard to manage in a democracy and when you've got multiple jurisdictions and all that sort of stuff. And you've got the free market banging into government and you've got policies unaligned. We here in Australia have done some things to ourselves that are not very smart. Other parts of the world have been a bit better at it. But we in industry, I can only speak for ourselves, we have to be part of the solution. So renewables brings part of a future that has lower carbon intensity and ultimately lower cost, but it's not always reliable because the wind's not always blowing, the sun's not always shining. So that's where working in, for an engineering company, we get excited because we've got to bring storage, we've got to bring reliability, and it's not a one-for-one replacement. You can't go and take an 800 megawatt coal-fired power station out, put an 800 megawatt wind farm in, and say we're done. You're not done. They're in different places. You've got different transmission lines. You've got different reliability issues. And there's a cost for retiring one, there's a cost for building the other, and all that has to get factored in. And but that's it's an exciting time, but it's one where we got a lot of work to do.
Absolutely. You mentioned how Australia might not have set things up so well. So what's the role with government and with the free market? Where's the happy medium between them, in your opinion?
Yeah, it's one I've thought about a lot, actually. I actually think this energy transition now has got to a point where it's less and less about government, and I'm talking globally at the moment, not just Australia. It's less and less about government, and it's companies driving this thing for a number of reasons. But, there's been a very large jurisdiction in the world who decided they were going to back out of the Paris Accord and decided that they were going to remove some legislations that was seen as anti-coal, and nothing's happened. There will be no new coal-fired power stations built in the US. The decline that's underway will continue. 2015 was the peak year in the world for the use of coal for power generation. 2018 is the peak year in the world for the use of fossil fuel for power generation. Despite the fact that we're going to increase the amount of gas we're using to make electricity, the drop-off in the use of oil and the use of coal is so large that whilst gas is growing, the overall use of fossil power will be declining. And that's happening in some places irrespective of what governments are doing. Now, it's happening because you're getting to end of life on some of these coal-fired power stations like we are in Australia. It's happening because the finance community does not want to finance new fossil power power stations. One, sometimes it's for reputational reasons, or they want to make sure their balance sheets are supporting things like the Paris Accord. In other cases, they're sitting back there saying, this needs to return for a minimum of 20, sometimes 30 years to get our money back. It might not have a social licence to operate in 20 or 30 years. Or we may have a government come to power in that time that may shut these things down. Or renewables may become so cheap that this is unviable. So for a number of reasons, there's a lot of uncertainty around fossil. That's happening without government. The finance community is becoming very important now. Now, the thing about finance community is they're not there to go and look after the individuals. And so they're at the moment chasing renewables because they get a great return. But they're creating instability in the grid by putting a solar plant here and a wind plant there, and they do that, grab their money and go. But meanwhile, somebody's got to rebuild the transmission systems. Someone has to look at the reliability when the sun's not shining and the wind's not blowing. And so that's where we're running into problems right at the moment, and that's the role of government. The role of government needs to be to help build an effective transition between the old and the new, and to give us some reliability in the system. And that's where, for instance, here with the National Energy Guarantee, despite the convoluted way we got there, it might actually be the right approach. Well, there's two dimensions to coal, of course. There's thermal coal, so coal to go make electricity, and then there's coking coal or metallurgical coal, which is used for smelting. Metallurgical coal is going to continue for quite some time. The world does have to solve for that at some point. And there's some early stage work going on in some of the big metals companies to say, how could I replace this with industrial scale hydrogen or made from green resources? But it's a long way off. Well, not a long way off, but it's still to come. The thing with thermal coal is that electricity production can be replaced today, either by gas or by renewables. And so that's the first thing that the world's going after. Look, Australia is an incredibly lucky country in terms of its energy resource, in terms of the fact it's got coal in the ground, it's got oil in the ground, it's got a lot of gas in the ground, it's got uranium in the ground, it's got a great solar resource, it's got a great wind resource in some places. It's time to move from some to others, and it's allowed us to industrialise and have a great quality of life. And you could say the same about a lot of countries in the world. We now need to move on to producing energy in such a way that we're not leaving a legacy for the generations to come that may not be able to be addressed. And I think we then got to think and be smart about how do we help the developing world get to where we got, but not necessarily on the same path.
Absolutely. So you've obviously really care about the sustainability of the planet and, my generation personally. Do a lot of the executive level kind of people you deal with in corporate and so forth, is everyone on the same page, or is this old paradigm kind of just staying there from the top level?
Well, I'm one of those people that sits back and says, we're all on the same planet. It's the only one we've got. Yep. So, and I'm a scientist by training, so I can't deny the data. The data is clear that the planet's getting warmer and that we've got more CO2 in the air than we've had for millennia. So, and we need to go address it. We know where the CO2 is coming from because we're the guys pulling it out and burning it. So, we're in a happy place at the moment in terms of, at the time you come to the realisation, if you don't have a view on how to fix it, then that's not a very happy place to be. But right today, we've got new solar, new wind is cheaper than new fossil, clear. And we've got to do some other things around reliability and storage. It's a big investment to replace all this. But it's possible, and the more folks we get their creative and innovative energies around it, the better. In terms of other executives, look, this at the end of the day, sometimes you can end up in a situation where the way a market's going and the way it makes money can be in conflict with another more altruistic issue. I don't think that's the case here. I think, look, we want to do the right thing and we need to go make money for our shareholders, and you can do both here. So, and we should do both here. And the bigger issue for folks is it involves change, and a lot of people find change scary. It's easier to get up doing what you did yesterday than getting up thinking about a different tomorrow. But we have to, and I'm really pleased that the company I'm in which is largely an energy company, is fully engaged on this, and our customers are increasingly becoming fully engaged, and they want help. A lot of our customers don't get up in the morning to make energy; they get up to extract a resource or to make some other type of product, but they use energy. And now they're sitting back there saying, well, my energy costs are moving on me. My shareholders and stakeholders are asking me about my carbon intensity. My employees are asking me about what am I doing, and I need help. And that's where we can come in and help them.
Absolutely. So you've touched on a few of the technologies that you see are coming in the future. What do you think our utopian energy grid looks like? And you mentioned solar and storage, and what about things like nuclear as well?
Well, let me take you to a different endpoint, and we'll work back. Today, the final form of delivery of energy around the world is only 18% electricity. It's going to move to 40, 50 and more percent in the coming decades. And that's really important, because once you electrify items, then you can go and feed them with green electricity wherever it's come from, or at least lower carbon electricity. Whilst ever you're still delivering energy in its final form as a liquid fuel or a gas fuel, your ability to manage carbon emissions is quite limited. So the electrification of most things is coming, and people need to get their heads around that. They need to get their heads around all sorts of things that they thought would never become electric. Then you work back to, where do you get the electricity from? And you can always have a backup of fossil for electricity when the system's not working. Should we, to your point, should nuclear be part of that? It should, because obviously it's a very low, apart from the carbon you create by building the plant and extracting the uranium, it's basically zero carbon. The problem is, one, the cost of building those plants, the cost of regulation, and the social license to operate. And, I think a new nuclear plant now is a very expensive beast. We do nuclear in Worley Parsons, so we're aware of that. There are not too many new plants happening in the world, but in some countries they need to be part of the mix. So in China and India, where they're trying to lift an awful lot of people up and give them universal access to energy, it'll be part of the mix.
And this will be...
The South Australian experience has been a good one, because a year ago I would have told you that the market doesn't know how to price batteries. And so for industrial or grid scale, the Tesla battery in particular was a government sanctioned, not a market sanctioned battery, and we've learnt a lot from it. We've been involved in a number of other grid scale batteries. The initial thinking was, look, they're only good for minutes, sometimes hours. They're really there for emergencies and stability. But no, the reality is they can actually, if designed well and connected to, so the Tesla battery, for instance, is connected to a wind farm, so it can be powering up and it can be arbitraging depending on peak loads in the market. Where we're going to get to is, in the not too distant future, is a lot of renewables in countries that can do renewables, and not all countries have a good solar resource or a good wind resource or a good water resource. And then for peak load and for stability, current thinking would say you'll have a small number of fast start gas peaking power plants that just give you that reliability. But the problem is they may only run for 30 odd days a year. And that's a very expensive piece of capital then for that short amount of time. Batteries are starting to look like a good alternative, because when batteries aren't providing that peak load, they can be providing other services in terms of stability and market arbitrage. So we've got more to learn about batteries, but they will be part of the system, and but they'll be different in each case. It's not a you can't go, right, I'm taking out that coal plant, I'm putting in this solution. You've really got to figure out what you're trying to achieve, what balance of affordability, reliability, sustainability, what your local capability is in terms of solar and gas and wind, and then build the right solution.
Mm. We're going to jump around a bit as we move to the end. You've mentioned how change is going to be something big in everyone's careers in the future. How do you recommend that professionals best prepare for the change that is around the corner?
Change. Look, you've got to either embrace change or get run over by it, frankly. And I'm supremely optimistic of where we're going to get to when there's more millennials running the show than there are now. And I think their ability to see the issues, grapple with them in a responsible way, fills me with a lot of positivity. I don't want to go and criticise the current generation of leaders out there because I'm one of them, but look, change is scary, and I think one of the things we've got to do, and we've seen this at times where people jump too far forward and say, well, in year X, 40% of the jobs of that year don't exist now. Freaks people out. You've got to take them along on a journey. You've got to explain to them, hey, there's a reason for change. We're here. The next step is this. And do a good job of explaining why this can be an inclusive change for everyone. If we put too many unknowns out there, or it looks like change for change's sake, then people will not buy in, the antibodies will rise, and we'll end up going backwards. And we know what happens when we lose these debates, because we lost these debates in the 1970s around nuclear power, for instance, in Australia. We've lost them in recent times around non-science-based discussions on fracking and all sorts of things that were... some people had some genuine concerns, but they built them up into such a frenzy that there was no longer an intellectual rigour in the discussion, and we ended up going backwards. So that's hard for leaders to go do, because they've got to slow down and go and take everyone with them. And whereas in the past it's been easy to just go make a decision and roll it out there and expect people to come along. Social media in particular has given everyone a voice and has given them sources of information, not always sources of good information. But we can't ignore it, and we have to bring along an ever-increasing and diverse constituency. And I think, one of the things, if people want to really make progress on change, an interesting approach is go and find someone who thinks you're not right, like an NGO or someone that doesn't trust you, but has a similar outcome they're trying to get to, and sit down and have a discussion with them, and have a discussion about what would our shared view of success look like. And oftentimes you're less far apart than you think.
That's terrific. And we were chatting before this about avoiding groupthink, and it's very, very tough to get out of that and then listen to someone who's got different opinions sometimes, because by listening you're admitting a little bit of uncertainty about your own opinion as well.
Oh no, look, when you're in this change area, you have to wake up in the morning thinking, I might have been right yesterday, but I could be wrong today. And if you think you're walking into the room as the smartest person, then you've got a real problem. You actually need to be looking for data points that are starting to shoot down what you currently think, because that way you learn faster, and whoever learns fastest wins. And it's Yeah, no, it's not a safe place anymore to think, oh, I'm an expert in something, because you're an expert in something that was, not something that is. And but surround yourself with a lot of good people that ask good questions, and people who listen and look more than speak. And the best ideas and the best observations sometimes come from unexpected places, and always they come from people who are touching the market. Most of the people who are sitting in offices are not touching the market. So go and find people who are. Look, we'll get through this energy transition. I mean, we have to. We don't have a choice. And it will take a lot of human ingenuity. And it will have some twists and turns along the way. But I'm very optimistic.
Great. For my last question, this is something I asked all the guests, so it doesn't have to be exactly related to what we've been speaking about, but I anticipate it will. What do you think will have the biggest impact on the buildings industry in the future?
Oh, look, there's as your listeners know, we use a lot of energy in constructing buildings and then operating them, and moving people and goods to them and from them. I've been fortunate. I've been to some fantastic cities around the world, and you see some of them completely empty at night time and then refill in the morning. That's a lot of energy being used up. So I think we're getting good with designing buildings for low energy usage. I think we're getting better at building energies with less energy usage. Moving people around and creating cities that have where people aren't trying to live at one extreme of the city because of cost or because of lifestyle, and then having to go all the way to the other side of the city to go work, and then somewhere else to social, is the next big thing, and from what I can see. And I think the way we do work's changing. You don't always have to be somewhere to do work. You don't always have to be with someone to collaborate. We're already having to start to rethink cities, knowing that autonomous vehicles are coming. And what we can't have is affluent people having their own autonomous vehicle, driving them into the city, dropping them, and driving home to have a free garage, and then driving out to pick up the kids and drive. We're going to double the amount of moves, and we're going to have gridlock, right? Because cities are designed for flows in one direction and not in the other at different times. So I think we've got to have a more intellectual discussion about how do we, in some ways, go backwards and allow people to work, live and socialise in a smaller area, so that we can reduce the amount of energy that's going on. Because it's not simply a matter of saying, let's put in better public transport in a city. Once you've built a city and you haven't got enough public transport, you're sort of done. And it's a prohibitive cost to go change it. So these are really good problem statements, I think, and if we get them out there in front of the right groups of people. And you know what happens is people now, in some countries, are moving to the cities that better manage those, and those cities are growing much faster because the leaders there are continuously working at livability, and we're fortunate to be recording this today in the world's most livable city. But they've got to keep working at it.
Thank you so much for coming on the show, Tony. If people want to find out more about yourself and some of the projects you're on, where should they go?
Well, look, I work for Worley Parsons, and so you can go to worleyparsons.com. I'm on the site. You can see some of the stuff we're doing, and you can also reach out to me at tony.frencham@worleyparsons.com.
Hey guys, Adam here. Just before you go, one quick request. I would like to learn more about you. In the show notes, you will find a survey that will only take a couple of minutes. I want to know how I can improve the show, what guests you would like to hear from, and what topics excite you the most. If you do it, you're a legend. Thank you very much. Enjoy your day, guys. Cheers, and see you next time.